What if the people who are worst suited to lead are the ones most likely to end up in charge? Picture this. You walk into a boardroom, a government chamber, or even a school meeting. You scan the room and you realize something unsettling. The person with the most power might actually be the one who least deserves it. Not the wisest, not the most ethical, just the most successful at climbing. So, you have to ask, is there something deeply broken in how we choose leaders? Look around the modern world: politics, corporations, institutions. You see the same pattern. Take Richard Nixon. He climbed all the way to the top of American politics. Smart, experienced, strategic. Yet he became infamous for paranoia, deception, and the abuses of power revealed in the Watergate scandal. Here's the uncomfortable part. The very traits that destroyed him at the end: ruthless pragmatism, willingness to bend rules, obsession with control, were the same traits that helped him win power in the first place. And this isn't new. Nearly 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli was watching the chaos of Renaissance Italian politics and noticing the same thing. In The Prince, he wrote, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, too few to come in touch with you. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are." In plain language, when it comes to leadership, appearance beats reality. Machiavelli wasn't just cheering for liars and manipulators. He was describing how humans actually work. And modern psychology has basically backed him up. For example, research in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who are overconfident are often rated as more competent, even when they're not. The confidence itself becomes a kind of costume of competence. We don't measure who's actually good. We reward whoever seems sure of themselves. In this video, we're diving into a brutally honest question. Why do our systems keep rewarding narcissists, liars, and even fools with power people who should, in theory, be the last ones trusted to lead? We'll look at why narcissistic traits are such a powerful advantage in leadership selection, how deception and illusion quietly shape what we see as strong leadership, why simple, confident answers beat thoughtful, complex ones, and finally, what it would take to design systems that don't just reward the worst people. We'll also look at rare leaders who break this pattern and what makes them different. Let's start with narcissism. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must avoid being seen as weak, fickle, or timid. In modern language, the person in charge must look firm, decisive, and unshakably confident. The moment they look unsure, people start to doubt them. Now translate that into today's world. Who's naturally good at projecting certainty, superiority, and self-importance? Narcissists. Think of a simple scenario. You're lost in the woods with a group of strangers. Two people step up and offer to lead. The first one says, "I think I know the way out, but I'm not completely sure. There are a few paths we could try." The second one says, "I know exactly where to go. Follow me. Don't question it." Now, here's the key. Both of them are equally clueless. The first is being honest about uncertainty. The second is bluffing. Who do most people follow? Almost always the second person, the one who sounds certain. Have you seen this play out in your own life? At work, in school, in politics, people gravitating to the loudest, most confident voice, even when deep down you know they're oversimplifying or straight up guessing. There's research backing this up. A meta-analysis published in Personnel Psychology looked at 54 different studies on narcissism and leadership. The pattern was clear. Traits like extreme self-confidence, charismatic self-presentation, and big, bold visions do help narcissists get picked as leaders. But here's the twist. Those same traits often backfire after they're in charge. Companies led by narcissistic CEOs have been found to show much more volatility in performance and are significantly more likely to get hammered by negative market reactions to their big, visionary moves. In other words, they create drama, risk, and instability. Adam Neumann, the former CEO of WeWork, is a textbook case. He persuaded investors to value a shared office company at around $47 billion, even while it was losing staggering amounts of money. His grand vision, his cult-like charisma, his unwavering belief in himself, these things attracted billions in funding and made him look like a revolutionary founder. But those same traits, recklessness, detachment from reality, belief in his own myth, helped drive the company into a spectacular crash. When reality finally caught up, WeWork's valuation collapsed by more than 80%. The illusion couldn't be sustained. So why do we keep falling for this pattern? Because psychologically, we are wired to chase confidence, especially when we're uncertain or afraid. Experiments show that people who sound sure of themselves get more status, more trust, and more influence, even when they're wrong as often as everyone else. One researcher put it bluntly, "We don't just like confidence, we prefer it over accuracy." Machiavelli understood this dynamic centuries ago. He pointed out that nothing makes a ruler so admired as great undertakings and impressive displays. The grand project, the bold promise, the dramatic vision, these things create a halo of greatness. Even if the execution is shaky, the appearance of greatness matters more than the reality of competence. But this is important. It's not always like this. There are leaders who break the pattern. Take Seretse Khama, the first president of Botswana. When he took power, Botswana was one of the poorest countries in Africa. Unlike many leaders who built personality cults and clung to power, Khama focused on building strong institutions, governing with restraint, and acting with a kind of quiet, steady pragmatism. Under his leadership, Botswana's economy grew dramatically, transforming from a tiny, fragile state into one of the continent's most stable and prosperous democracies. Life expectancy rose. Institutions strengthened. Corruption was kept relatively low compared to neighboring nations. Khama didn't need the theatrics of narcissism to lead effectively. His legacy shows a different model: stability over spectacle, substance over performance. So, we have this split. Narcissism helps people win power, but traits like steadiness, integrity, and genuine concern for the people help leaders use power well. When you think about the leaders who truly changed your workplace, your community, or even your country for the better, are they the ones who shouted the loudest and pushed themselves to the front? Or are they the ones who might not have looked like classic leaders at first glance, but proved themselves over time with decisions, consistency, and calm? This is the core of the leadership paradox. The qualities that help people climb to the top are often different from the qualities that help them run things well once they get there. In the next part, we'll go deeper into something even more uncomfortable: why deception, both intentional and self-inflicted, plays such a huge role in leadership, and why our brains are so easy to manipulate when someone in power knows how to aim our attention. Let's talk about one of the most controversial ideas Machiavelli ever wrote. An idea that people still misunderstand today: deception. When Machiavelli said that great leaders have known how to beguile men's minds by shrewdness and cunning, he wasn't telling people to become pathological liars. He was pointing out something far more uncomfortable. Deception works. Not because humans are stupid, but because humans are predictable. And the kind of deception that works in leadership isn't the cartoonish, obvious kind. It's the subtle kind, the misdirection. Think of a magician performing a card trick. Your eyes are glued to the flashy right hand, the hand waving dramatically in front of you, while the left hand quietly performs the actual trick. Leaders, corporate, political, institutional, use the same playbook. They draw your attention to carefully curated metrics, inspiring plans, emotional narratives, while the messy reality stays hidden in the shadows. Have you noticed this? A leader gives a presentation and spends 10 minutes talking about the incredible year of growth. Only later you find out that growth meant something very specific and very limited. Or they brag about a record-breaking quarter while never mentioning the deeper structural problems under the surface. This isn't accidental. It's strategy. But why does it work so consistently? Because humans have what behavioral economists call optimism bias. Whenever information is unclear, we naturally lean toward the interpretation that feels more hopeful. We want things to be okay. We want to believe progress is happening. We want leaders to be capable. So when a leader gives you a message that can be interpreted in multiple ways, your brain fills in the gaps with whatever makes you feel better. And leaders know this. They craft statements that different audiences interpret in different ways. Corporate America is a masterclass in this. Losses are renamed strategic investments. Cuts become streamlining for efficiency. A bad year is a transition period. A minor win is framed as a historic milestone. And here's the strange part. Sometimes this works in the organization's favor. Research from the University of Michigan found that when leaders frame challenges in positive language, employee morale and productivity can spike, even when the underlying situation hasn't actually improved. In other words, a confident narrative can temporarily outperform reality. Machiavelli captured this when he wrote, "One looks to the end. If a prince wins and maintains his state, his means will always be judged honorable. If you succeed, people rewrite the story to make you look wise and justified. If you fail, the same actions suddenly look manipulative or foolish." But not all leaders rely on illusion. Some lean into brutal honesty, and surprisingly, it works. Take Patagonia under founder Yvon Chouinard. Instead of hiding environmental harm like most clothing brands, Patagonia publicly admitted the damage their products caused. They even ran an ad saying, "Don't buy this jacket." They told customers to repair their old clothing instead of purchasing new items. Sounds like financial suicide, right? It wasn't. That radical transparency built unprecedented trust. Revenue grew. Loyalty soared. Customers admired the brand because it didn't talk like a brand. It talked like a human being telling the truth. But here's where the story gets darker. The most dangerous form of deception isn't what leaders tell others. It's what leaders tell themselves. A study published in 2023 found that being in a position of power increases self-deception by 42%. Think about that. The more power someone has, the more they start believing their own hype, their own stories, their own propaganda. And because they believe it, they become more persuasive to others. That positive feedback loop amplifies their confidence even further. It's a psychological flywheel that can spin completely out of control. This is why some leaders spiral, why they make baffling decisions, why they lose touch with reality. Not because they're villains, but because power distorts self-perception. They sink deeper and deeper into the myth of their own infallibility. Now let's talk about fools, yes. Fools because they, too, often rise to leadership. Machiavelli wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Wise leaders surround themselves with strong, capable advisors. Insecure leaders surround themselves with flatterers and fools." But here's the twist: sometimes being simple helps someone win power. There's something called the pratfall effect. It's the idea that highly competent people who show small signs of relatability, little imperfections, become more likable. But there's a darker flip side. People who seem simple, straightforward, or down to earth can become more likable than those who appear too intellectual or complicated. Think of political campaigns that talk about the beer test. Who would voters rather have a beer with? It sounds silly, but it reflects a real psychological bias. George W. Bush was a great example. Educated at Yale and Harvard, yet he intentionally adopted a communication style that felt folksy and uncomplicated. For many voters, that made him relatable, even comforting. Humans crave clarity. We dislike ambiguity. When a problem is complex, and one leader gives a long, nuanced explanation while another offers a confident, simple answer, people often choose the simple one, even if it's wrong. A Stanford study of nearly 1,000 CEOs found that leaders who communicate in simpler, more casual language are more likely to be hired and often receive higher compensation. But those same leaders were more likely to underperform in complex environments that required nuanced thinking. And Machiavelli anticipated this 500 years ago. He said that a leader should obsess over what is concrete, practical, and action-focused. In politics, that means focusing on war, stability, or security, not on abstract theories or philosophical arguments. This creates something I call the complexity trap. The leaders who are best at handling the real messy complexities of leadership often look less confident and decisive, so they lose to candidates who oversimplify everything. So far, we've seen how narcissists, liars, and even fools can rise to the top. But there's another layer, a darker one, tied to empathy. Machiavelli famously wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Most people take this as a call to cruelty, but Machiavelli wasn't glamorizing fear. He was explaining a psychological reality. Too much empathy can make a leader ineffective. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that powerful individuals actually display reduced activity in the brain's empathy circuits. That sounds sinister, but it can be adaptive. Think of a surgeon. If a surgeon felt the full emotional weight of every incision, every scream, every moment of pain, they couldn't operate. Detachment isn't cruelty. It's a coping tool. Leadership works the same way. Sometimes decisions cause short-term pain for long-term good. Leaders who are overwhelmed by empathy may hesitate when decisiveness is required. But here's the catch. People with naturally low empathy, including narcissists, are often perceived as calm, steady, and built for leadership. Research from the University of California found that people with higher narcissism scores were significantly more likely to be chosen as leaders in group settings, even when their actual leadership performance was worse. Machiavelli summed it up perfectly. One who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. In the next part, we'll explore how virtues, honesty, humility, kindness can sometimes create worse outcomes in leadership, and why context, not personality, is the real key to understanding who leads well and who collapses under the weight of power. Let's dig into one of the most counterintuitive ideas in leadership psychology. Something both Machiavelli and modern research agree on. The virtues we admire most in leaders can sometimes create the worst outcomes. Honesty, humility, compassion, integrity, these are things we say we want from leaders. But in real-world power dynamics, these traits can actually become liabilities when applied without context. Machiavelli put it bluntly. Thus, it is well to seem merciful, faithful, humane, religious, upright, but you must have a mind so framed that when it becomes necessary not to be so, you can change to the opposite. To a modern audience, that sounds almost villainous. But he wasn't advocating cruelty. He was pointing out that rigid virtue can be just as dangerous as none at all. Think about this. Have you ever worked under someone who is too kind, too patient, too forgiving, too eager to please? At first, it feels wonderful until everything starts falling apart. Boundaries dissolve. Conflicts go unresolved. Standards drop. Productivity crumbles. Chaos spreads because the leader won't enforce discipline or deliver uncomfortable truths. Leadership requires judgment, not just morally good intentions. And we see this dynamic play out on the world stage. Take Angela Merkel during the 2015 European refugee crisis. She made the bold, compassionate decision to accept over 1 million refugees. But she didn't rely on empathy alone. Her leadership involved balancing humanitarian values with logistical realities: housing, integration, public sentiment, political backlash, and the long-term future of Germany and the EU. If she had led with only empathy, ignoring practical concerns, the result would have been disastrous. If she had led with only cold pragmatism, rejecting compassion entirely, the consequences would have been equally damaging. Her success came from the ability to shift between empathy and practicality as the situation required. That's what Machiavelli meant. Leadership is context, not virtue versus vice, but knowing when each quality leads to the best outcome. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Some leaders do manage to build systems that reward true virtue without losing effectiveness. One of the best examples is Costco under former CEO Jim Sinegal. He implemented what's now called the servant leadership model. Leaders serve their employees so the employees can serve the customers. Costco paid wages 40% higher than competitors and provided health care to 85% of employees, compared to Walmart's 47%. Did this kindness destroy the company? No. It built one of the most loyal workforces in the industry. Their turnover rate dropped to 17%, compared to the average retail rate of 44%. And Costco stock outperformed Walmart by 300%. In other words, treating people well worked. Not because kindness is always the right strategy, but because in this specific context, it produced the best long-term outcome. Here's the bigger point. Leadership is not about choosing virtue or ruthlessness. It's about the wisdom to know which one the situation demands. Aristotle wrote about this over 2,000 years ago. He said virtue is not following strict rules. It's using judgment to apply the right principle at the right time. But modern systems often fail to select leaders who have this kind of wisdom. Why? Because we don't choose leaders based on what makes them effective once they're in power. We choose them based on how good they look before they're in power. Machiavelli saw this clearly. For how one lives is so far removed from how one ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will bring about his own ruin. In leadership competitions, elections, interviews, promotions, the people who play the game most convincingly often win. The people who perform leadership get chosen over the people who practice leadership. Think about how we hire in the workplace. The confident, polished speaker wins the interview even if the quiet, thoughtful candidate would be more effective. The charismatic presenter gets promoted even if their team quietly dislikes working with them. The person who says, "I know exactly what to do," gets chosen, even if the person who says, "Let's examine the data," is far more accurate. Research confirms this pattern again and again. People with narcissistic traits are more likely to emerge as leaders in group settings, regardless of their performance or qualifications. And here's the deeper evolutionary reason. Humans evolved to respond to signals of dominance, especially during uncertainty or danger. Our brains are wired to look for height, vocal strength, confident posture, certainty, and boldness when choosing leaders. These signals had survival value in ancient environments. The strongest-looking member of the group might have been the best protector, but today, those same instincts misfire. A tall person with a deep voice isn't automatically a good CEO. A confident man pounding the podium isn't automatically a good president. A charismatic visionary isn't automatically a good founder. And yet the same patterns chimpanzees use to pick their alpha male still influence human leadership choices today. Machiavelli understood the conflict between the people, those who want safety and stability, and the nobility, the ambitious class who want dominance and control. He argued that these opposing desires shape every political system and often lead to the systematic selection of the wrong leaders. The people want to avoid being oppressed. The elites want the power to dominate. The result is a power struggle where the most aggressive climbers usually win. This creates a disturbing cycle. Those most eager for power are often least suited to handle it wisely. Those who would be the best leaders often avoid power because they understand its weight. Think about Nelson Mandela. He didn't seek power for its own sake. He gained moral authority through suffering, patience, and integrity. And when he finally became president, he used his power to heal, not retaliate. Or Abraham Lincoln. He was awkward, quiet, deeply introspective, qualities that made him seem unpresidential at first. Yet those qualities were exactly what America needed during its darkest crisis. These leaders are proof that good leadership is possible, but rare. The system doesn't naturally elevate people like them. Machiavelli knew this when he wrote, "It is not necessary for a prince to have all good qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them." In other words, the world rewards the performance of virtue more than the practice of virtue. The next part will explore how systems, not individuals, determine whether leadership goes horribly wrong or astonishingly right. And we'll look at what organizations can do to filter out manipulators and elevate leaders who can actually govern wisely. If there's one truth that keeps repeating throughout history, it's this: individual leaders matter less than the systems that select and restrain them. Machiavelli understood this on a deep level. He didn't believe people were angels, nor did he expect rulers to be morally perfect. Instead, he focused on designing structures that could prevent the worst instincts of leaders from destroying a nation. He wrote, "A prince must choose to be both the fox and the lion. A fox to detect traps, deception, and manipulation. A lion to project enough strength to deter threats and maintain order." But here's the real insight. No single person is consistently good at being both. That's why systems matter. So let's talk about how leadership systems either reward or restrain narcissists, liars, and fools, and what actually works to keep them in check. 1. Leadership selection is often built on illusion, not substance. Let's return to Machiavelli's point that a leader must appear to have good qualities. In most organizations today, political campaigns, job interviews, board selections, this is exactly what happens. We judge leaders based on the confidence of their answers, the charisma of their delivery, the simplicity of their message, the posture, tone, and stage presence they project. But none of that predicts how they'll actually behave once they're in the seat of power. It's like casting a movie. You pick the actor who looks like a doctor, sounds like a president, or feels like a CEO. But leadership is not a performance. It's a constant series of decisions where stakes are real and consequences are permanent. And yet, the selection process almost always rewards the best performer, not the best operator. This gap, the gap between appearance and reality, is the source of endless political disasters, business failures, and institutional collapses. 2. The leadership paradox. What gets you the job isn't what helps you do the job. Studies repeatedly show that the very traits that help someone win power, narcissism, overconfidence, charisma, simplicity, boldness, often make them worse at exercising that power responsibly. Researchers call this the leadership paradox. In simple terms, we elevate the wrong people because we measure the wrong qualities. Instead of evaluating how a leader thinks, we evaluate how a leader looks while thinking. Instead of focusing on past behavior, we focus on performance during interviews or speeches. Instead of examining real competence, we get hypnotized by confidence. This is why political debates are almost useless. This is why job interviews often fail. And this is why entire organizations end up regretting their choice of leader within months. 3. Evolution hardwired us to trust dominance. Signals, leadership biases aren't just cultural, they're biological. Humans evolved in small groups where threats were physical and immediate. We instinctively looked for height, strength, vocal authority, boldness, certainty, dominance. These signals had survival value in pre-modern environments. But in today's world, they're useless. They can even be harmful. The best modern leaders need emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, adaptability, collaboration skills, and the ability to process complex information. Traits that are often overshadowed by a tall, loud man pounding a podium. We may laugh at the idea that humans choose leaders like chimpanzees choose alphas. But research from the University of California says our instincts are still shockingly similar. And that's a problem. 4. The people who want power the most are often the worst at handling it. Machiavelli saw this firsthand in Renaissance Italy. He wrote that the nobility, the elite class, were always hungry for power, dominance, and control. Meanwhile, the common people simply wanted to avoid being oppressed. This dynamic still exists today. Ambitious climbers often rise fastest, not because they're capable, but because they crave dominance. They shape their image, they manage impressions, they manipulate perceptions. Meanwhile, the best leaders, those who think deeply, who understand consequences, who see leadership as responsibility rather than opportunity, are often reluctant to pursue power at all. Think of leaders like Nelson Mandela, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Václav Havel. None of them sought power to satisfy ego. They rose to leadership because the moment demanded someone with clarity, conscience, and steadiness. But these cases are rare, because our systems do not naturally elevate such people. 5. So, how do we fix this? How do we reward the right leaders instead of the wrong ones? Some societies, both ancient and modern, developed clever systems to balance human psychology with the realities of power. Take the Venetian Republic. Their method of choosing a doge, their leader, was so complex it looked like a puzzle box. They used multiple rounds of random selection combined with elections to prevent any single faction or manipulative person from capturing the entire process. Why? Because they understood exactly what Machiavelli understood. Power makes people dangerous. Systems must be designed to prevent capture, and they were right. Venice remained politically stable for nearly 1,000 years. Modern organizations are trying to develop similar methods. Bridgewater Associates and radical transparency. At Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund, founder Ray Dalio implemented one of the most extreme systems ever created for preventing narcissistic leadership. Radical transparency. Employees at every level can critique leadership decisions. The CEO receives regular anonymous evaluations. Important meetings are recorded and available for review. This prevents the echo chambers that narcissistic leaders love to build. It makes it almost impossible for a manipulator to hide behind charisma. Is it extreme? Yes. Does it work? Also, yes. What else helps organizations detect manipulators? Here are the reforms that research and history suggest actually work. 1. Prioritize track records over interviews. Past behavior predicts future behavior far better than speeches or charisma. 2. Mandatory trial periods. No permanent leadership position without months of observation and 360-degree feedback. 3. Divide power. The person who proposes actions shouldn't be the same person who approves them. 4. Assign a devil's advocate. Every major decision needs someone whose official role is to challenge assumptions. 5. Term limits. Power decays, judgment always. Limiting time and power protects organizations. 6. Rotate leadership positions. Fresh perspectives reduce the psychological corruption that comes from long-term dominance. Machiavelli understood that power, left unchecked, grows toxic even in the hands of good people, and modern psychology finally proves it. Power changes the brain. Power distorts empathy. Power amplifies self-deception. Power erodes restraint. So the real solution isn't finding perfect leaders. It's building systems where even flawed leaders are forced to act in the organization's best interest. In the final part, we'll explore how context, not personality, is the real key to leadership effectiveness, and how we can redesign our institutions, companies, and communities to select leaders who create lasting stability instead of chaos. When you really break down everything we've explored so far, one conclusion rises above all the rest. Leadership quality depends far more on systems than on individual personality. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago, and modern organizational psychology confirms it today. You don't build stability by hoping for perfect leaders. You build it by creating systems that restrain, guide, and correct imperfect ones. James Madison said it best: "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." That single sentence captures the entire philosophy behind effective leadership design. Don't expect leaders to be perfect. Expect them to be human. Then build structures that keep their humanity from becoming a threat. 1. Context creates leadership, not the leader themselves. One of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is the idea that great leaders succeed everywhere. They don't. Leadership effectiveness is almost entirely determined by context. A bold visionary might thrive in a startup, but fail in a bureaucracy. A calm stabilizer might excel during peace, but crumble in wartime. A consensus builder might shine in collaborative environments, but struggle when decisive action is needed. This means our obsession with personality traits, charisma, confidence, eloquence, is misplaced. What actually matters is whether the leader's strengths match the environment they're entering. Most organizational failures happen because the wrong leader was placed in the wrong situation, not because that leader was universally incompetent. 2. Leadership selection is the core problem. Most of our systems choose leaders through rituals that reward performance, not competence. We judge people by how confidently they speak, how well they present themselves, how simple and forceful their answers are, how charismatic they seem in short bursts. This is why interviews, debates, and public appearances so often elevate narcissists, performers, and manipulators. These arenas reward the appearance of leadership, not the substance of it. Imagine if leadership selection relied instead on long-term track records, real behavioral patterns, feedback from previous teams, decision-making simulations, measurable results instead of promises. Most of the leaders who currently rise would be filtered out in the first round. 3. Strong systems prevent weak leaders from becoming dangerous, even if someone with manipulative, narcissistic, or simplistic tendencies rises to leadership. A strong system can neutralize the damage. Consider safeguards like term limits, which prevent long-term decay, separation of power, which blocks unilateral control, radical transparency, which exposes bad decisions early, independent oversight, which detects corruption, rotating responsibilities, which stop power accumulation. Machiavelli didn't expect rulers to be noble. His goal was to design structures that force leaders to behave in ways that protect the state, even when they don't want to. Modern studies agree. Power corrupts unless there are constraints. Systems that distribute power, enforce accountability, and create checks naturally reduce the influence of toxic personalities. 4. Most leadership failures are actually system failures. When organizations fall apart, they blame the leader. He was incompetent. She was too emotional. He lied. She didn't understand the situation. But the deeper truth is this: leaders don't fail alone. Systems allow them to fail. Leaders collapse when no one challenges their assumptions. Advisors are chosen for loyalty instead of honesty. Flatterers drown out experts. Bad decisions face no internal resistance. Accountability mechanisms are weak or non-existent. A manipulator becomes powerful only in a system that rewards manipulation. A fool becomes dangerous only in a system full of silence. A narcissist becomes unstoppable only in a system that lets them rewrite reality unchecked. Systems turn flaws into disasters or contain them entirely. 5. The most powerful safeguard: educating people about how leadership actually works. Even with structural protections, the ultimate defense against bad leadership is awareness. When people understand psychological manipulation, they stop falling for it. When employees, citizens, or voters learn why confidence can be misleading, why simple answers are seductive but dangerous, why charisma doesn't predict competence, why visionaries often oversell their abilities, why certainty feels good even when it's wrong, they become much harder to manipulate. A psychologically educated society doesn't get dazzled by performers pretending to lead. It sees through the illusion. That alone dramatically reduces the power of narcissists and liars. 6. The future: systems that reward reality over performance. Imagine organizations and nations that measure outcomes over speeches, test leaders before promoting them, enforce transparency at all levels, hold leaders accountable with real consequences, match leaders to environments based on data, limit the influence of charm, confidence, and theatrics. These systems shift the advantage away from manipulators and toward competent, grounded, steady individuals. The ones who rarely seek power for ego, but can wield it responsibly. We don't need perfect leaders. We need systems that make imperfect leaders behave in ways that benefit the group. 7. The rise of the Machiavellian citizen. A truly healthy society doesn't rely on blind trust. It relies on informed skepticism. A Machiavellian citizen judges leaders by actions, not promises, resists emotional manipulation, understands human psychology, values competence over performance, demands accountability, and never confuses charisma with leadership. This type of citizen forces the system to evolve and forces leaders to rise to a higher standard. Because in a world still ruled by illusion and appearance, the greatest power belongs to those who can see through the performance and recognize reality for what it is.